Hello, friends. Welcome to our Bible study for the book of Hebrews. I am excited to delve into this with you. There is a lot of richness and detail in the letter to the Hebrews. So we're just going to make our way through it. And so with that being said, let me share with you a little bit about what I'm using as reference and guide for us. I am utilizing N.T. Wright's Hebrews for Everyone commentary. And what's great about this commentary is that there is also a Bible study companion guide. So if you are interested in having your own copies of the books, this is a great little way to help you kind of go back and reflect on what we're discussing. And as we go along, I'll share some of the information and some of the thought-provoking questions that N.T. Wright provides. So, because Hebrews is so rich in language, we will probably take the chapters in chunks of various verses. So I think that will be helpful to us. First of all, let's just start with when Hebrews was written, why it was written, the audience it was written to. Probably somewhere between 50 and 70 CE. Some scholars think maybe even as late as 60 CE to 95 CE. So somewhere in there. We don't know who wrote the letter to the Hebrews. I think occasionally it's been attributed to Paul, but there's really no evidence for that. It's got a little bit of a different tone than Paul. It to my mind, kind of takes some of Paul's themes and fleshes them out for us a little bit. And the audience would be those who are perhaps, beginning to be the second generation of followers of the way. You've got people who come from a Jewish background that are now followers of Christ, but also the Gentiles are becoming more involved as well. So now you have all of that tension and things that need to be explained. So that's what we have here in Hebrews. So I'm going to let's start with reading chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. In many ways and by many means, God spoke in ancient times to our ancestors through the prophets. But at the end of these days, he spoke to us in a Son. He appointed this Son to be heir of all things. Through him, in addition, he created the worlds. He is the shining reflection of God's glory, the precise expression of his own very being. He sustains all things through his powerful word. He accomplished the cleansing needed for sins and sat down at the right of the Majesty Supreme. See how much greater he is than the angels. The name he was granted is finer than theirs. For to which angel did God ever say, "You are my son, today I became your father"? Or again, "I will be his father, and he will be my son"? So, Hebrews, right out of the gate here, we are laying the foundation for who Jesus is. And the idea is that not to be dismissive of what's in the Old Testament, not to be dismissive of the law and the prophets, but to say the plan all along was for God to come to us in the form of Christ, his Son. So God appointed his Son to be heir of all things. He was there at the beginning of the created world. And then it says he's a shining reflection of God's glory, the precise expression of God's very being. And one of the things that N.T. Wright presents to us is the idea that this would actually be not like a mirror for us, that Jesus mirrored God to us, God's character. But then he talks about the fact that character also would have meant like Hebrew characters, Hebrew letters, right? Or Japanese characters when you're writing. And the idea that those things were stamped, right? So that you got an exact impression. You had the stamp and you had an exact impression on the page of that character. And Wright encourages us to think of Jesus in that way, that he is stamped perfectly with God's character. And I just love that. I think that's a really neat way to think about it, and an idea that I had never heard before. As I already said, in the letter, the writer's telling us to look at the whole sweep, right, of the Bible, the whole sweep of biblical history, and to see that as coming to fruition in the culmination of Jesus Christ. And so throughout the letter, we find that we start with the Old Testament, and then the writer points us forward to something yet to come through Jesus. So now let's keep going. Let's do verses 6 through 14. And this is interesting because there are multiple references to the Psalms here in these verses. So again, when God brings the firstborn son into the world, he says, "Let all of God's angels worship him." In relation to the angels, this is what he says. God makes his angels spirits and his servants flames of fire. In relation to the Son, however, it says, "Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of uprightness is the scepter of your kingdom. You loved justice and hated lawlessness, and therefore God, your God, anointed you with the oil of gladness as superior to your comrades." Now that's verses 6 through 9, and there are 3 different psalms mentioned, okay? So in verse 6, Psalm 97. Verse 7, God makes his angels spirits and servants flames of fire, Psalm 104. Following that, we have Psalm 45, verses 6 through 7. And then in verse 10, we have Psalm 102. And then in verse 13, we have Psalm 110. And all of this is talking about how Jesus is superior. Jesus is superior to the angels. And, just different. Jesus is different in every way. He's greater than humanity, although God brought himself down to be on our level, but he's also greater than the angels. So in verse 10, again, you established the earth, Lord, from the beginning. All the heavens are the works of your hands. They will be destroyed, but you will remain. All of them will grow old like clothing. You will roll them up like a cloak, and they will be changed like clothing, but you are the same, and you never give out. So we are laying out right here, God is constant. This is the same God at work throughout human history up until now. Nothing has changed. This has always been part of God's plan. And so one of the things that N.T. Wright brings up in that is that the law wasn't fixed for all time, as many of the people thought, and maybe we still think today, but it was part of God's preparation. And N.T. Wright argues part of the brilliant and beautiful wrapping in which the ultimate present, the gift of God's own self through Jesus, would be contained. And so he suggests that this letter is warning us as followers to not mistake playing with the wrapping paper instead of the gift, right? Not to be so distracted by the beautiful packaging that we miss the gift that's inside. And there was something else I wanted to bring up. the verses also speak of God in a king-like way. I think we're familiar with that idea, right? We're familiar with the idea that Jesus will sit on the right hand of God. And, that there's this new age coming. A new age is coming, and once we can recognize and understand who Jesus is, as the writer of Hebrews is fully laying out for us, once we see the role that he's intended to play in God's plan, we don't want anything less. We don't want to go back to anything different. So I think that's some really powerful thinking for us to consider. So some questions to ponder as you think about these verses in chapter 1 are, when we think about the reign of Christ, what does that give us hope for? And when we think about the condition of the world today, where do we most long to see the reign of Jesus? And then he asks the question that if the angels and the law and the prophets were all part of God's preparing us for this wonderful gift, how can we pay closer attention to who Jesus is and to the role of worship and service that we're called to, so that we are in fact focusing on the gift and not the wrapping. So those are two things for us to think about as we move into chapter 2. So we've talked about Jesus as being greater than the angels. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how we relate to the humanity of Jesus and how Jesus' relationship connects with us. So Hebrews 2, 1 through 4. So then, we must pay all the closer attention to what we heard, in case we drift away from it. You see, if the word which was spoken through angels was reliable, with appropriate punishment every time anyone broke it or disobeyed it, how shall we escape if we ignore a rescue as great as this? It started by being declared through the Lord, and it was confirmed to us by those who heard him, and God bore witness as well, along with them, in signs and wonders and many different types of powerful deeds, and by the Holy Spirit distributed in accordance to his will. So, basically the message here is we really have to pay attention. We really have to focus here, because if the way that God presented God's will to us was reliable through angels, right, through visions, through prophets, etc., and people still disobeyed, we can't get away with ignoring a rescue like this, right? We can't get away with ignoring something that is laid out so perfectly as God's plan for us and the ways in which it was delivered. And then N.T. Wright really talks about how if you're on a boat, you don't want to just drift aimlessly, right? So that's something to consider. And he says that God frequently acts through what seem like natural or random events. If we wait for this lightning bolt to guide us or save us, we might miss the ordinary means that God uses to guide us, to heal us, to rescue us. And he says that the point of that the writer of Hebrews wants to get across in this passage is that we're going to look really stupid if we ignore the things that God is doing for us on the grounds that it's not what we expected or it's not what we wanted. So again, that idea of following God's will, God's plan, God's control, not our own. If God already sent the law through the angels, look what happened. People ignored that. So now what's going to happen if we refuse something even more important, something even more powerful? God might just take it as we don't really care. We don't really feel like we want to be rescued. And this is a warning to us. Wright says especially for those who have grown up in a Christian family or part of a regular church community. I mean, I know some of us have been in the church our entire lives. Some of us have actually been in the same church our entire lives. And that we kind of become complacent, right? We think it's just easy to take the pressure off, coast along, right? Allow other people to do the work, other people to do the praying and the thinking and all the serious business. And we kind of just go along for the ride, right? We don't put a whole lot of pressure, a whole lot of effort or thought into it. And he says the problem is that if we haven't got our own motor running and our hand on our own tiller, we may drift further and further away without realizing it. So it's really about taking ownership of your faith, right? And that's part of the reason why we do things like this Bible study, so that we're learning, so that we're taking we're taking some control over the depths to which we explore our faith. So I really appreciated that commentary. We're also warned here to be careful about contrasting the law and Jesus. I think we hear this a lot. The God of the Old Testament was threatening and violent and vengeful, and the God of the New Testament is all about peace and love. But he says that there's, if we just think of Jesus as soothing and comforting and healing, then we're kind of missing the challenging and life-changing reality that is Jesus. Like we kind of make him more of a cozy blanket than it really is, because Jesus was really bringing to life things that are meant to challenge and change the status quo. So, Jesus as the truly human being, Hebrews 2, 5 through 9, excuse me. You see, God didn't place the world to come, which is what I'm writing about, under the control of angels. Someone has spoken of it somewhere in these terms. These may sound familiar to you. What are humans that you should remember them? What is the Son of Man that you should take thought for him? You made him a little lower than the angels. You crowned him with glory and honor, and you placed everything at his feet. Those words echo Psalm 8, verses 4 through 6. When it speaks of everything being subjected to him, it leaves nothing that is not subjected to him. As things are at present, we don't see everything subjected to him. What we do see is the one who was, for a little while, made lower than the angels, that is Jesus, crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of his death, so that by God's grace he might taste death on behalf of everyone. Now, just a few verses. Doesn't seem like there would be a lot there. There is a lot to unpack here. First of all, I want to note these words, everything being subjected to him. We don't see everything subjected to him. What we do see is the one who for a little while was made lower than the angels. What does that mean? That is that Jesus died. Okay? He was crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of his death. So that by God's grace he might taste death on behalf of everyone. So this is where we start coming into this idea of Jesus sort of as a bridge for us, or a connector between us and God. So I think it's not just about there being a brand new kingdom and a brand new king in the Messiah, but that there is a new way that the whole world should be, and there's a new way that world should be ruled, and the message is really one of hope. The hope that is to come, because we will know God's grace, right? And there's a continuing theme that God has always intended for it to be this way. Jesus was always meant to become superior to the angels, even the angels who, gave the Jewish law. And he's planning for this future role that's been given to the Son. And something that I don't think we really reflect on enough is the fact that Jesus is the humankind fully realized that God desired from the beginning. It is mysterious to think that, we have with Adam and Eve, God has given them such an important role, and humans are special, that humans seem to be lower than the angels, but God intends, says right, that they would become the world's true governors, and that's what being crowned with glory and honor means. Now, obviously, we've fallen short of that, but Christ did not. So, you hear language like the word for human in verse 6, the singular, a human being. So in the next line, the phrase son of man, which would have been heard in the Jewish ear, a typical human being, right? A son of man, would sound different to those who know the book of Daniel, and the way that the book of Daniel highlights the fact that the description of the Messiah. And so all of that is in here in just these few words that that we're thinking about Christ as King. And beyond that, beyond this idea of Christ as a king, Christ as a prophetic voice, Jesus is representative of us. Jesus stands for us before God and does what we cannot do. He is Israel's Messiah, but we are learning that he is also the true Lord of the world. And something I hadn't considered, knowing that Jesus represents us, but also here, right, talks about Jesus representing Israel as its Messiah. And since Israel was designed by God's purpose to be people who would represent the entire world, Jesus now represents that much larger community, right? So this idea that God's bigger than what you think, but this has been his plan all along. And Jesus has stood in for us and done for us what we cannot do for ourselves. So these last few verses in chapter 2, 10 through 18, it talks about our relationship in particular with Jesus, particularly as siblings. So let's read more about that. This is how it works out, starting in verse 10. Everything exists for the sake of God and because of him. And it was appropriate in bringing many children to glory, that he should make perfect through suffering the one who leads the way to salvation. So, in Christ, God has made perfect through suffering the one who will guide us and lead us, go before us into salvation. For the one who makes others holy and the ones who are made holy all belong to a single family. We are all God's children. This is why he, the Messiah, isn't ashamed to call them his brothers and sisters when he says, I will announce your name to my brothers and sisters. I will sing your praise in the middle of the assembly. And again, I will place my trust in him. And again, look here, I am with the children God has given me. Since the children share in blood and flesh, he too shared in them in just the same way, so that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil. So devil and death are equated. And he has set free the people who all their lives long were under the power of slavery because of fear of death. Now, that echoes for us Exodus. It's obvious, you see, that he isn't taking special thought for angels. He's taking special thought for Abraham's family. So we're really being put at a level of importance to our Creator here. That is why Jesus had to be like his brothers and sisters in every way, so that he might become a merciful and trustworthy high priest in God's presence to make atonement for the sins of the people. He himself has suffered, you see, though being put to the test, and that is why he is able to help those who are being tested right now. So, there we are. He's the high priest. In other words, he makes atonement. He brings us into one with God. And, you know, the idea here for us is that Jesus is the older sibling, and not the kind of perfect sibling that we are in envy of, one that is proud or looks down his nose at us, but that loves us and comes and finds us where we are out of the sheer goodness and love of his heart to help us and bring us up to be with him. So then there's the elements here that we have heard, that Jesus is the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, right? Jesus is the one that leads the way. Jesus is the one that kind of carves a path for us, in this wilderness journey, in this crazy stretch where we don't know where we are. Jesus kind of carves the path for us. And how did he do that? Through death, right? The second element is Jesus has done all of this specifically through his death. The language that's quoted here is from Psalm 22. I will declare your name to my brothers and sisters. But in that psalm also, if you go back and you read through it, the psalm describes in horrendous detail the suffering and the death of one who is truly trusting in God. And this is where the phrase, my God, why have you forsaken me," comes from. So we're turning a corner. You know, the psalmist starts out with this horrible suffering and death, but we turn the corner of salvation is accomplished, God's kingdom is coming, and we can sing God's praises. And then, as we talked about a little bit before, there's that element of high priest that's discussed, that Jesus is not as distant from us as we think that Jesus is, but that Jesus shared in our flesh and blood, even unto death. He felt what we felt, had those experiences, and thus can sympathize with those of us to whom he ministers, those of us whom he lifts up to God. So, I think it's fascinating that there's so much of Hebrews that refers back to the Psalms. I really, that's something that I hadn't dug too deep into before or thought about before. So a couple of things to consider as we close out this portion of our study in chapters 1 and 2 are, what evidence do you see in your life or in the Christian community that revealed to you the message of Jesus is true and powerful? Perhaps what are those ordinary things that have led you to acknowledgement of the extraordinary? And also to prayerfully consider, what does it mean in your daily walking around life that Jesus has already dealt with death on our behalf, and that Jesus is already ruling the world as its rightful Lord? And I'll close with this. N.T. Wright says that the passage highlights how Jesus already attained the status which God marked out for humans in general. I mentioned that before. Here we meet a point which we shall discover to be typical of the way that Hebrews understands the Old Testament. Psalm 8 is quoted in chapter 2, verses 6 through 8, and speaks of humankind in general as set in authority over the world with everything subject to him. But, says Hebrews, this hasn't happened yet, because humans are not ruling the world in a way that brings God's order and justice to bear on the whole of creation. True. Everything is still in a state of semi-chaos. Still true. How then can this Psalm 8 be taken seriously, right? How can we read Psalm 8 and understand it? Well, because if we understand that Hebrews goes all the way back to the beginning to set up this plan of God's, then the answer for us is that it has already happened, and that is because of Jesus. He's the representative of the human race. He's gone ahead of the rest of us into God's future, and that future is where order and justice, the saving order of the world, the healing justice for the world will come. He will bring that into being. So, I hope you've grabbed your Bible. I hope you enjoy this time. And just to learn a little bit more about one of the letters in the New Testament. Friends, I'll see you back here next week. We'll do chapters 3 and 4. Until we meet again, take care.